Bienvenue tout le monde, bienvenue à cette...
Welcome everyone, and welcome to the sitting of the Official Languages Committee and the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages, represented by Ghislaine Sakerly, who is with Pascal Giguère, Mary Donaghy, and Jean Marleau. So this morning we will be looking at the yearly report 2016-2017 of the Commissioner. So, Madam Commissioner, we're listening, and we'll be listening to you for the next few minutes, and then we will go to questions and comments from the committee members. Please go ahead.
Le rapport annuel cette année se divise en 3 chapitres.
The annual report is divided into 3 chapters. The first chapter looks at the 150th anniversary of Confederation, which we have the pleasure of celebrating this year. The second chapter addresses a number of topics related to new opportunities for official languages. And the third chapter deals with leadership in the public service. Let's look at these subjects one by one.
Leading up to the 150th anniversary of Confederation, the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages made significant efforts to ensure that federal departments and organizations would take linguistic duality fully into account in their activities and in the services to be provided to the public during this high-profile Canadian event. We will also be taking part in the celebrations, using this opportunity to better promote the fundamental role that linguistic duality has played in Canada's history and its importance for the future. The celebrations will not be limited to 2017 because in 2 years we will be celebrating another important milestone in Canadian history. In 2019, the Official Languages Act will turn 50. This would be a good time to conduct a review of the federal language policy, given how much Canadian society has changed since the last revision of the Act in 1988. This evolving context, including technological developments, means that it is time to think about amending the Act. The government should address this situation and assess the relevance of updating the Act. That is certainly what we plan to do at the Office of the Commissioner in consultation with official language minority communities. It may be the only recommendation in this annual report, but many other recommendations were made in various files during 2016-2017. Tout au long de l'année, l'évolution de certains dossiers.
Throughout the year, advances in some of our files have brought new perspectives to key areas such as support for early childhood development. On October 3rd, Commissioner Graham Fraser released his report, Early Childhood, Fostering the Vitality of Francophone Minority Communities. This report revealed that in Francophone minority communities, early childhood development is hindered by a lack of resources, a shortage of staff at early childhood centers, and a fragmentation of services. It also confirmed that the lack of funding earmarked specifically for early childhood in the Roadmap for Canada's Official Languages 2013-2018 Education Immigration Communities has made these communities vulnerable and often unable to meet their own needs.
The Office of the Commissioner has participated in consultations conducted by Canadian Heritage that will help develop the next Official Languages Plan, which will be released shortly. We noted that the groups that were consulted focused on the promotion of linguistic duality, the vitality of official language minority communities, and the active role of the federal government. With regard to access to justice, on October 20, 2016, the federal government announced changes to the appointment process for Superior Court judges. These changes responded to the recommendations made by Commissioner Fraser and his counterparts in Ontario and New Brunswick in their 2013 joint study, Access to Justice in Both Official Languages, Improving the Bilingual Capacity of the Superior Court Judiciary. Many of the Office of the Commissioner's interventions in 2016-2017 were intended to support the leadership demonstrated by certain institutions and to encourage others to do the same. The Office of the Commissioner supported the efforts of those who worked to implement the Act within their jurisdiction. We also encouraged the use of more strategic approaches to find solutions to systemic problems and produce tools to help institutions better comply with the spirit and letter of the Act. Malgré tous ces signes encourageants, il reste encore...
Despite all of these encouraging signs, there is still a lot of work to do in terms of respect for official languages, as demonstrated by this annual report, which indicates that the Office of the Commissioner received a total of 1,018 admissible complaints in 2016-17. We have not seen such a high volume of complaints since 2009-2010, when we received 876 complaints against CBC Radio-Canada regarding the CBEF radio station in Windsor, Ontario. As usual, the majority of the complaints, 565 of them, pertain to communications with the public. In March 2017, the Office of the Commissioner completed its investigation into complaints about the lack of service in French on Parliament Hill. Since the complaints on this issue were filed in 2015, responsibility for security on Parliament Hill has been transferred to the Parliamentary Protective Service, which has established a number of operational procedures, including reminders and training programs, to ensure that all of its employees are aware of the requirements under the Act and comply with them at all times. A total of 183 complaints dealt with Part 5 of the Act regarding language of work, and this issue remains a cause for concern. We have also noted a significant increase in the number of complaints filed under Section 91 of the Act, with 192 complaints pertaining to the language requirements of positions. This high number is also worrisome.
To the President of the Treasury Board in May 2016, asking him to amend the Directive on Official Languages for People Management in order to address his recommendation concerning the linguistic profile of supervisory positions, which appeared in the Commissioner's 2010-2011 annual report. We have begun a dialogue with the Treasury Board Secretariat to examine this matter more closely. Changes are already taking place at some federal institutions with respect to the language skills required for supervisory positions in regions designated bilingual for the purposes of language of work. In 2016-2017, Shared Services Canada, Health Canada, the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Canada Border Services Agency, and the National Gallery of Canada endorsed the Office of the Commissioner's position on the required language level. This year, instead of carrying out a report card evaluation of federal institutions, we conducted our own consultations with several official language minority communities and federal departments to gather their comments on the effectiveness of our interventions, specifically our work with federal institutions, our studies, and our promotion of linguistic duality. The results are encouraging. The people we consulted appreciate the Office of the Commissioner's work and want us to do more. You received a letter with more information on the results of this consultation today. Il importe de célébrer les victoires, mais je suis consciente.
It is important to celebrate victories, but I am also aware that significant challenges remain nationwide. According to projections recently published by Statistics Canada, the number of Francophones in the country will steadily decrease between now and 2036. This projection demonstrates the importance of current efforts to assist Francophone minority communities across the country in becoming host societies. Even if we are rightfully concerned that the status of the French language is threatened by demographics, the public opinion of the majority appears to be constantly improving. In a Nielsen survey commissioned by the Office of the Commissioner in early 2016, 88% of respondents said they support the objectives of the Act. Another interesting statistic is that 96% of respondents stated that Canadians should be able to receive federal government services in the official language of their choice. I want it to end on a positive note in keeping with the beautiful weather that has finally arrived. Thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. And we'll begin immediately with Sylvie Boucher. Good morning, Madam Commissioner, and thank you all for being here today. I read your report attentively, and I have a hard time understanding that the number of complaints has gone up. It really makes no sense given all the reports on official languages that have been conducted heretofore. How is it that in 2017 we're still having a hard time, at least for Francophones outside Quebec, in being served in the language of their choice? Have you implemented any mechanisms to bring down the number of complaints? Well, the number of complaints fluctuates every year. There were a few years where it decreased, but since 2012, where it's been increasing. It's still difficult to explain trends like this one. But this year in particular, the increase in complaints in two sectors, service to the public. It would seem that Canadians have complained more often that they haven't received services in the language of their choice, so more complaints of that sort, and an increase in the language profiles of jobs in the public service. It seems that civil servants are more aware of their obligations, which is not a bad thing in and of itself, but it might lead to an increase in complaints because Canadians are more aware of their rights, and this means that they would be ready to lodge more complaints. I think that the interventions carried out by the Office of the Commissioner, where he or she has exercised his jurisdiction, the instruments we've developed, the reports we've brought out, our reports with audits and recommendations. These are tools that we can use to improve the performance of federal institutions, which should have a positive effect on a reduction in complaints. Now, this isn't the first year that we've seen this sort of thing. An increase in complaints. perhaps people are more aware and they lodge more complaints. That's all to the good. But I think things are more difficult insofar as the more complaints there are, the more things you have to deal with, and the complaints start piling up. In your report, and I read the whole thing, let's talk about early childhood. You also talk about Anglophones in Quebec. How, and I worked in Quebec. Quebec Anglophones are not recognized as a minority in their own province. So how, when you're making recommendations on early childhood, how do you go about helping the Anglophone community in Quebec while you know very well that this minority is not recognized in the province? Well, as you know, last year we tabled a study on early childhood development. And when we began our study, we soon realized that the needs in Quebec were of a very particular nature. So this particular study dealt with early childhood outside Quebec, but in the yearly report, we are looking, or have looked, and are still looking at the situation of Anglophones in Quebec and what the federal government can do to support the Anglophone minority. Well, you know, there's a particular situation in Quebec because we have M30, which keeps the federal government from acting in a Quebec jurisdiction. So how can you get people to reconsider this and think about all this, not only in the rest of Canada, but in Quebec? Because if we want to help the Anglophone community in Quebec, we have to work with Quebec. In the rest of Canada, it's different, but in Quebec, it would be impossible not to work with Quebec. Yes, we have to bear all the issues in mind, and as we developed our recommendations, and in developing our recommendations, we can ask the federal government to work in collaboration with the province. And it might have a certain influence in the recommendations. Mr. Lefebvre. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for appearing here with your report. It's extremely important. I think there haven't been revisions to the Official Languages Act. It was in 1988 the last time. And this committee has been dealing with this as well since the fall. And I know there's a Senate committee that's looking at it. What are you going to do? What revisions are you looking at in your study? What revisions are you targeting? Well, first of all, we're going to be consulting with the official language minority communities, both Francophone and Anglophone, and we're going to look at the information that's been collected over years and at the challenges we've seen in enforcing the Act.
There are new ways of providing services. We appeared before Parliament, for example, relating to the publication of decisions on internet sites, for example. This is the way then we intend to carry out this study so that we will be able to develop a position that will also take into account the consultations that will have occurred. And of course, we expect to be called upon as witnesses as part of the Senate committee study. and the study by the House of Commons. We hope that this will be complementary. So this is the way we intend to go about it. Yes, one of the things that I see in the report, there is a record number of complaints. Doesn't seem to be any end to it. And I'm wondering how we can help you bring about a reduction in the number of complaints. I'd be interested in knowing your opinion then. How can a possible revision result in greater support for your services and better compliance with the Official Languages Act on the part of the federal government to bring about a reduction in the number of complaints? It might have to do with the wording of certain sections of the Act that should be made more explicit. Federal institutions, I think, do understand their obligations, but how can we ensure that this is the case? What is to be understood by an active offer or proactive offer of services? Should the legislation be more clear to ensure that federal institutions do fulfill their obligations and ensure that there's a better performance? This would result in a reduction of number of complaints. I'll turn over the floor to my colleague, Ms. Lapointe. Thank you. I'd like to continue along the same lines of my colleague, Madame Boucher, with respect to early childhood education in English in Quebec. I think that we have to understand what happens, whether the school boards in Quebec, they are either English language or French language, but I don't believe that early childhood education is subject to the same stipulations. If I open a daycare center in a family environment, is it only available in French or in other languages? I don't have any information on this. It may be that some of my colleagues could add something. Thank you, Ghislaine. Thank you for the question. The work that we've been doing in Quebec, in cooperation with the QCTN, is starting to look at this particular issue in detail. And what we see that is different in Quebec from the other provinces, in other provinces where there is a French language minority. And I think that this is something that you already noted in Mr. Fraser's report last year. In Francophone communities outside Quebec, there is the issue of early child education that has an effect on the identity of the children. It's a way of connecting the children to a Francophone community in the hope that they will be able to continue within the French education system and that they will be able to develop the ability to express themselves in French as well as an identity, a Francophone identity. When we talk about the situation in Quebec, it's not quite the same dynamics that come into place. The identity question is not so central. And the question of education is not similar in Quebec. What we've been attempting to understand and the link between health and welfare of young Anglophones in Canada. I'm thinking of the situation outside the city of Montreal. In smaller Anglophone communities, there's a great deal of social economic pressure that comes into play in these small Anglophone communities, and I think that this is where we have something to do in early childhood education. We haven't yet determined whether we'll be publishing a report on this subject, but we expect that in the next 12 to 18 months we'll be finishing our work, and we will be in a position to talk about the results and make certain recommendations. Thank you. Yes, I think it's important to address this difference between Quebec and the others. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank our witnesses for presenting their annual report. It's an important one. It would appear that you've given us a type of portrait of what has been taking place for the past while. And one of the important elements is the increase in the number of complaints. Most of these complaints are linked to the famous Section 91. That is a language of work of managers, particularly in the public service. And in this respect, there was an article, or there was something that was broadcast in CBC, namely that French is crumbling in the public service. That is, Catherine Lantier talks about the general situation of French in the public service and that there is dissatisfaction at all levels, including at the highest levels. And there's a particular reference to the fact that in certain committees of deputy ministers, there's never a word of French spoken. And there's another testimony. A new deputy minister arrived who spoke only English from one day to the next. All the assistant deputy ministers stopped speaking French, even the francophones. This is not a new concern. Even Mr. Graham Fraser did draw our attention to this fact in a letter to the Prime Minister, saying that it is urgent to take some action because there are lots of complaints on this subject, and we see that it is still taking place. There was the Mendelssohn Task Force dealing with the language of work, but I am concerned nonetheless because I think that you've taken a position very similar to mine, and the position of the government to the effect that people should be able to make a choice to speak in their language of choice only in areas that are designated bilingual, whereas in my view the Act does make it quite clear, as you say, that this Act does confer the right upon all employees in these regions without any requirement, without any reference to the language requirements. Can you make some comments then about this ability for all employees to work in their language of choice? You talk about the Mendelssohn-Broadbey report, where we expect this report to be published soon, and we're very anxious to see what their description of the situation is and what type of practices they will suggest and the follow-up that will be given by the government. With respect to Section 91, as I said, in the fall of last year, because of the increase in number of this type of complaints, Mr. Fraser wrote to the President of the Treasury Board, reiterating once again the importance of changing the directive, stating that official positions should be BBB, where in our view they should be CBC and region designated as bilingual. A task force was set up. This group is still working. And what was the view of this working group? It's a group of employees in the Treasury Board and in our office who meet regularly to debate these particular issues and who hope to come to some type of conclusion. And what exactly is there to debate? BBB, it has to be increased. It can't just be CBC. These are higher requirements, I take it, higher language requirements that are being called for, so that people to understand that BBB is only an average knowledge. You are requiring a higher level for management positions. Yes, the discussions can deal with that particular issue. They can deal with other subjects. For example, are there certain categories of employees who require this particular language profile? Would there be another type of profile that can be considered? Or BBC, for example? All of these details can be examined by the group. And what is the position of this work group? Do you agree with the position? Are you going to be making joint recommendations? I don't know whether we'll be making joint proposals, but certainly that the Office of the Commissioner of Fingal Languages should be able to take a position after this meeting. We are waiting for the results of this Mendelssohn-Broadbey report, the purpose of which is to examine this issue. We know that they have consulted a large number of officials and supervisors as part of this study. So I think that they might have some interesting proposals to make. Time is going by very quickly, and I would like to talk about Parks Canada. It's the 150th anniversary. Parks are being opened up to everyone, and we have only 2 recommendations out of 9 that were in fact carried out. I put a question in the House of Commons some months ago, even a few years ago. Nothing has been. I don't know how you can manage, but in your position, I would say I would be very discouraged. Before we all get discouraged, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Vandel. I'd like to thank you for your presentation. In your report, you mentioned something rather disturbing. In view of the fact that Stats Canada projections indicate that by 2036, the proportion of Francophones will have decreased. As a representative of St. Boniface Saint-Vital, I am very concerned about this. I'd like to know whether you have any recommendations about how we can reverse this trend. I think that the results of this study of Statistics Canada should be considered a cry of alarm to make us realize that it is important to start taking action on many fronts at the present time. We've been talking about immigration, the immigration of Francophones for a long time now. The importance then of welcoming immigrants in areas outside of Quebec and making them aware of the fact that there are Francophone communities, making them aware of this fact before they leave their country so that they may be welcomed in French in these particular communities, and they will have access to an infrastructure, including schools, then community centers, that can provide them with support. Immigration, I think, is a very important aspect. It's not just one of the elements, but it's certainly an important one. And early childhood, we talked about early childhood education, providing support then to this area, education in general, education in the minority language, in continuing them from early childhood up to university. There are also programs that provide support to bilingualism in the majority community. That is second language programs, immersion programs. There are many opportunities then. And we hope that the Official Languages Action Plan will provide support to all of these aspects in an attempt to reverse this trend. Thank you. Your report refers, for example, to the difficulties of obtaining access to language tests in French and the costs of settlement services for immigrants in our communities. Can you elaborate a bit on this? And afterwards, I'll turn the floor over to my colleague. We did conduct an investigation on this particular situation. Complaints were received. We carried out an investigation, and our final report was sent to the parties. We made a number of recommendations, and we intend to follow up on these recommendations in 2018. So I can't give you any more information in view of the fact that it was an investigation. We did address this question. The complaints were considered to be valid, and we did make recommendations to immigration and refugees, Canadian citizenship, to deal with this particular problem. I'd like to thank you for being present here. It's always a pleasure for us to welcome you individually and as a group. And making us aware of our responsibilities as a government and a citizen. I'll be concentrating my remarks on Chapter 2. First of all, the question of the services provided to communities and the fact that there has been a moratorium. in order to review this entire issue of services. It's a crucial issue, and I'm very happy to see that you did bring it up in the report. Because if this current continues, you quite rightly noted that the Francophone population is decreasing in Canada, and there's this entire issue of immigration. We've gone through a number of very difficult years, and let me say that this particular moratorium has enabled us to study this question, and I'd be interested in knowing what other criteria could be added to ensure that minority language communities can, in fact, achieve the type of vitality that is necessary. I think we're going to have to ensure that people in Canada do take a stand on this issue. There's another important aspect, namely early childhood. And you talked about the fact that, namely, there's a lack of resources, the lack of services being provided. All of this requiring us to take rapid action. If young people, for example, in minority language setting go to English language daycares, then they will be lost to the Francophone community. There's fewer pupils going to French language schools, and one of the major, there are all sorts of problems. There's this question of the moratorium, and there's also the type of social infrastructure. And once again, I think that this is something that you're going to have to study in greater detail to ensure that as part of these new initiatives, we are able to find instruments that enable these minority communities to develop. If we don't have the type of infrastructure capital, and if these funds are distributed to the provinces without any way of ensuring that minority language communities will be able to take advantage of them, 10 years from now, we'll be at a further disadvantage. I think we're going to have to come back to this question later, because I'm going to have to turn the floor over to a member for New Brunswick, René Arsenault. Thank you for the question, Daryl. I was, en fait, listening to your remarks, and I must say that I was quite saddened to hear then that this report notes that in Francophone minority communities, the development of early childhood education is minimal, particularly because of a lack of resources and a shortage of staff in early childhood education centres and a fragmentation of the service. The absence of funding specifically devoted to this particular sector of the roadmap has made these communities vulnerable and unable to meet these needs. In the past 12 months, the Office of the Commission has taken part in the consultations carried out by Heritage Canada in order to develop an action plan that will be made public very soon. There's something that you mentioned, that these community groups have emphasized the promotion of language duality. The first question I'd like to put you then is, in this particular context, how in dealing with this interlapping levels of government, how can we deal then with early childhood education within the federal government? How can we target our needs and be able to come up with the resources in view of this type of struggle between the provincial and federal levels? Do you have any solutions to advocate? I think that one of the best approaches would be for everyone to understand what the issues are. And I think that if they took a closer look at what the problems are and the matters of jurisdiction, they would be able to learn to work together for the good of the communities. Is such a thing possible? Is it possible to create, enter into an agreement with the provinces? Can the federal government, for example, determine what can be done in their area of jurisdiction to advance, for example, the cause of early childhood education, and to agree on the importance of this issue, first of all, and attempt later on then to develop certain agreements and to avoid this type of turf warfare. If people are not willing to work together, then it can become very difficult. And what is necessary then is sustainable funding. If governments provide funding and then withdraw this funding, it makes it very difficult to maintain the same level of services. Yesterday, for example, we learned that Minister Duclos made an announcement, a very encouraging one, that was supporting some of our recommendations in our study of early childhood education. And it would appear that an agreement had been signed with a number of provinces for the development of early childhood education. We think that is a very encouraging sign. And when it comes to bilateral agreements that will be later entered into, and a desire on the part of the provinces and the federal government to work together, then I think that we will be able to count on concrete results.
Well, if hypothetically there are recalcitrant provinces, do you see a kind of solution? I know that provinces would be very happy to have the federal government pay for French-speaking schools. But do you see any possible solutions? Do you think provinces could be forced or strongly encouraged to do their share of the work and their share of the funding? We know that there are dialogues in the federal government, but what would happen with a recalcitrant province? Well, I think the pressure should also come from the communities which are affected by these decisions. Their voices have to be heard at the provincial level, and if there is the will on the part of the federal government to come to an agreement and the province doesn't want to, well, I think then the minority communities should exert pressure on the province and say, we need these programs. With respect to the roadmap, will there be opportunities to develop this kind of agreement with the provinces? Well, I know that on our part, we can try to influence through our studies, through the meetings we have with the communities, through what we see on the ground. We can help influence and perhaps convince people of the importance of this partnership. Okay, I've only got about 30 seconds. My question is, we met with people from the communities in our study, and there's nothing better than a community, knowing what it needs and that can use money to answer meet these problems. Well, our second report on early childhood in Quebec. Well, right now we're only at the exploratory stage of the study. But Minister Duclos' announcement yesterday said that communities had been consulted for the national framework. And I think that might be a good approach. Thank you very much. And now Bernard Généreux. I believe Bernard will be sharing his time with John Nader. Thank you, Madam Commissioner, for being here with your colleagues. I think we have an opportunity here in renewing the Official Languages Act. And you mentioned in your report, you mentioned this renewal in your report. How should we go about making sure we really understand the question about the Act and how to improve the Act and how to update it? Do you have any ideas to put to us? I know that there's a framework of the Act, but also there's its substance. Do you have any suggestions for us? For example, who should we call as witnesses? I think that you are a major witness in this kind of thing, but can you make suggestions? Well, we can certainly provide you with a list of potential witnesses. I think the key stakeholders are the representatives of the minority language communities. And we're also, I think the Senate committee is hearing from young Canadians. So what do young people think of the Official Languages Act, and how do they see themselves as Canadians, and what does this mean to them? And there are also specialists in various areas, in the areas of social media, of translation, of technology. There are all kinds of issues and all kinds of specialists you could call upon, for example, legal experts. You mentioned social media. Well, when the Act came about 50 years ago, we didn't have this kind of thing. We're in a totally different world from the time when the Act was implemented. Now, could you suggest a kind of plan so we don't forget anything in looking at all of this? I think you probably have a kind of working plan. Could you share it with us so we might use it to do our work? The other thing I wanted to ask is this. Within the Act, you talked about social media. Are there things that should be emphasized in order to see the Act evolve in a positive way? Well, there's Part 3, which has to do with the administration of justice. If you'll remember, we did present a study to Parliament on posting the court's rulings on the Internet. And also, we don't have in the Act that Supreme Court justices should be bilingual. We might address that issue. And with respect to services, and in the airports, they see their role as simply serving the traveling public. And we think they have an obligation towards the public overall. Are there any kinds of questions we should look at in particular? Because you're dealing with these things day in, day out, and the enforcement of the Act. I think you're in a good position to give us some ideas on how things should be interpreted or changed, and you might give us a list of witnesses who could address the various issues. Do you think that in the new iteration of the Act should have more teeth? Should it be able to use coercion? When we look at institutions that are having a hard time meeting the Act's requirements, and if I'm not mistaken, in some earlier reports, and particularly Commissioner Fraser's reports, felt that the Act didn't have the teeth it needed, the muscle it needed. Do you think in the new Act, the renewed Act, we might be able to make changes, especially according to the needs that you have identified? Well, within our study, there are other parliamentary officers who have this kind of power, the power to levy penalties. Do you think there should be enshrined in the Act things that have been mentioned by you or by previous commissioners? Well, these are things that could be proposed to changes to the Act. And we could also look at the Commissioner having more power, but this will be according, of course, to the testimony you hear. So you can provide a list of possible witnesses and also some of the areas that we might want to look at in making changes to the Act. Thank you, Bernard. Linda Lapointe and Daryl Samson will be sharing their time. Yes, because if I don't go first, my colleague will use up all the time. With respect to results, what is the approach you prefer? A horizontal approach, comparing results and meeting the goals of the Act? Or do you look at the ministers in charge of the Official Languages Act? Governance. Which approach do you think is best in achieving the objectives of the Act? Well, I believe in horizontal approaches. Each institution is responsible for a certain part of the Act, and they develop a particular expertise. So if these people work together horizontally, they get to results. There might be problems with aligning solutions, but as long as there is dialogue and cooperation, we can achieve some very attractive results. I don't really say one approach over the other, but there are players, with the players who are at the table, if they have common objectives, I think they can find a way to achieve concrete goals. On page 6, you said that you'd consulted, and the results are encouraging. It said that people appreciate the work that the Office of the Commissioner is doing, and they'd like to see the office do more. Well, it can mean different things. People like the tools we use. We have 4 tools. We did an audit. There's our annual report. We have our promotional tools and our performance reports. And people had a lot of good to say about these various tools, but in terms of doing more, I think we could try to work in such a way that these tools are better known, and we could help communities to use these tools to advance their cause. So we're making recommendations. The Liberal government is committed to seeing them take shape, and then official communities should learn about them. The more action we're able to carry through on behalf of communities and institutions. Institutions often ask us for tools in order to do their work. It's all of this. Whatever can help them to better meet their obligations. I'm now going to yield the floor to Mr. Sanson. Now, as you know, I gave you context. Now I've got a question. My colleague from New Brunswick read something. It also helped to confirm the funding for the roadmap 2016-2017. Can you explain a little more about how you meet the needs of these communities? Well, it's difficult for some organizations to recruit staff, competent staff, and to keep them. Well, the point here is that there isn't enough funding, and the roadmap really hasn't addressed this. Yes, well, we have to ensure that the funding is constant and stable. Because if we don't have stable funding, and if the funding doesn't come in on time, sometimes we get the money but late in the year. Now, I've got something else, and this has to do with a question on agreements. You said the federal government will have to negotiate on things like early childhood development, social infrastructure, or some other thing. It could be the National Federation of School Boards that might seek to exert a certain influence. Because I think all of this is really interesting. Well, here once again, I think it's the way we work together to achieve a common goal. If all these stakeholders really care about the vitality of the communities they represent, what do you say about governments that say that this falls within provincial jurisdiction and we can't go anywhere near some of these things? Well, first of all, have they dialogued with the province? Have there been discussions? Are people entrenched in their positions and their jurisdictions? Or are they ready to perhaps contribute and bring forward solutions that respect jurisdictions? Well, I have a short intervention by John Nader and then Francois.
Very quickly on some of the questions from Mr. Choquette about language work. You referenced that the Mendelsohn-Borbet working group ought to be published soon. I just want to follow up if you know when that might be published and whether that'll be made available to this committee or publicly. And following up on that, I wondered if you have any thoughts on why this is being chaired by a PCO official, someone who's not really that directly related to language work. You know, Mr. Mendelsohn is results and delivery. Why that's being done out of PCO rather than another department, if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I'll answer first your second question because the report was actually asked by the clerk. And the clerk, being in charge of the public service, he wanted to have a sense of what was the situation presently in the public service as far as language of work is concerned. He has Mr. Borbet being a deputy minister, I'm not sure, associate deputy minister, I think he was at the time at Canadian Heritage, who was very concerned as well, very preoccupied with what he was seeing. And we mentioned committees where, you know, senior officials of the government, you know, only speaking English in those meetings. So he offered Patrick Borbet to, you know, to get on that committee. And I think Mr. Mendelsohn, with his portfolio of delivery, which is a way of, you know, getting results, better results, that I think that's a reason why he was also asked to be on the committee. As far as the report is concerned, the last time we spoke with PCO, they mentioned that it was imminently, so probably this summer. They had progress reports. We haven't seen the report yet. I asked to see a report before it gets published. We'll see if they accept that. And when we receive the report, we will definitely analyze the results.
Merci, John. On va terminer avec François Choquette.
Thank you, John, and we'll end with François Choquette. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's recommendation 10 of your last report, your action plan for official languages, concerning immigration. And you asked in the recommendation that we come up with a policy on immigration, refugees, and Immigration Canada, and have a policy on immigration that recognizes the demographic weight of minority communities. Now, I'd like to discuss this with you because we will be receiving the minister the Minister of Immigration tomorrow, and what kind of possible solutions do you see to help us help minority communities? I'm thinking about the complaints lodged about Syrian refugees, where communities weren't consulted about how to integrate them in official language minority communities.
What do you think that we can say to him tomorrow so that a coherent policy is implemented? First of all, I think he should be congratulated on the steps that were taken for the Express selection program and also the Francophone Mobility Program. Those are both two excellent programs that will certainly be of assistance. As I said, I think it is important for immigrants as well as refugees who arrive in Canada for them to be made aware of the fact that there are two official language communities in Canada, that there are Francophone communities throughout the country. They must be made aware of this. They should be greeted by organizations that are funded to provide assistance to them. And there should be the infrastructure and the support necessary so that they can be integrated into these communities and develop an identity within such communities. All of these aspects are important. The services that support these immigrants must be well funded, and we hope that there will be some mention of this in the roadmap. Thank you. This brings your presentation to an end. On behalf of the committee, then, I'd like to thank you for coming here. Thank you, Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, as well as the General Counsel for the Commission. Thank you, then. We shall be suspending, then, for a few minutes. Thank you. And the second part will not be televised. I think this should be noted.
Voilà, nous reprenons.
We'll resume our meeting. First of all, there is a recording. There will be no comments on a letter that was sent. We determined what the content would be together.
Des infirmières.
So I'll be signing this letter and then send it. Chairman, I'd like us to start off with the motion referring to the QCGN and the FCA. I don't know whether it has been distributed. There's so many papers here. The motion then reads as follows. The committee clerk will be distributing it.
Je peux vous la lire, je l'ai.
I'll read this motion. I have it before me. That the committee recommend to the Prime Minister that he meet with the FCFA and the QCGN in order to include them in the process for selecting the next Commissioner of Official Languages and report to the House of Commons. Is that correct? Yes. I know that John Nader does have an amendment to propose. I'd like to second it.
Beforehand with Mr. Choquette about it, and I'll just read the changes, just to change it more to consult rather than include, just to make it more reflective of it. And it would read that the committee recommend to the Prime Minister that he meet with the FCFA and the QCGN in order to consult them regarding the process for selecting the next Commissioner of Official Languages. I think that more reflects the consultation rather than being more involved. So I think it would be more appropriate. So I can make that as an amendment.
On va traiter de l'amendement premier qui.
Well, first of all, deal with the first amendment. That the committee recommend to the Prime Minister that he meet with the stakeholders from the FCFA and the QCGN in order to consult them in the process for selecting the next Commissioner of Official Languages. Thank you, John. And now I'll be hearing you on the amendment. François Choquette, followed by Sylvie Boucher. Thank you, Chairman. Let me say, first of all, that I support this amendment. And the reason why I consider it to be important is that it is the desire of these two associations. The motion, then, is not a motion being presented by François Choquette. We could probably refer to it as the FCFA and QCGN amendments or motions. They would like to be able to consult before anything is done with respect to the appointment of another commissioner. And I think that it's worth taking the time because this is a letter that all the members of the committee have received. And I think that people should be made aware of the fact that this is not a motion being presented by me, so to speak, but rather by the groups. Myself and James Shea, who is I have a letter from him, the president of the Quebec Group Network.
François Choquette, about a motion he intends to introduce to the House Standing Committee on Official Languages during its meeting on June 13, 2017. The motion makes a recommendation to the Prime Minister to meet with the FCFA and QCGN stakeholders with a view to consulting our organization in the process of selecting the next Commissioner of Official Languages. The QCGN strongly supports this motion. We were disappointed that the process that led to Madame Mayer's nomination for Commissioner of Official Languages did not involve input from Canada's English and French linguistic minority communities, and have asked to meet with the Prime Minister regarding this matter. We are aware that 49.1 of the Official Languages Act requires the Governor in Council to only consult with leaders of every recognized party in the Senate and House of Commons in the nomination of a commissioner. However, the foundational nature of language rights and the national importance of official language minority communities, in our view, must include Canada's French and English linguistic minority communities. We urge you to support Mr. Choquette's motion next Tuesday. Alors, c'est signé par le président du QCGN.
It is signed by the president of the QCGN, James Shea. And this is why I prefer to refer to it as the QCGN and FCFA motions. Symbolically, I don't think we'd be able to do it in actual fact, because I don't think that groups would be able to move a motion to the committee. In other words, it's not something that is being presented by me or the NDP, but rather by these two associations. And that is why I think that it should be supported by everyone, for the reasons given. I think that it should be realized that we're talking about the amendment. Yes, we're talking about the amendment. The amendment, in other words, the motion. It isn't yet amended, but I think that everyone will agree with this amendment. And on this point, Chairman, I would like to say that the FCFA, that is the Federation of Francophone and Acadian Communities, had an election last weekend. Madame Sylviane Lancier, when she was president, did make a request to meet the Prime Minister of Canada on this particular subject, and now they have retweeted to say that with John Johnson, the same request is being presented. In other words, to meet the Prime Minister of Canada to deal with this particular process. And we know that the entire controversy, to simplify things, the controversy over the appointment for the Official Languages Commissioner, and I think that what these communities are advocating is removing all these controversial elements and this partisanship. I think that we did take a non-partisan stand on this to remove all this aspect from the appointment, so that we're no longer be squabbling over the appointment. That as all the communities, all the political parties will get together, and the FCFA will say that we agree with this process when it comes to the next appointment for position of commissioner. And when we ask for a meeting between the representatives of the community and the Prime Minister, it's simply a matter of showing respect to these groups and give them a chance to provide their input. So that some progress can be made. So let me repeat then, this motion is not to be seen as my motion, but a motion reflecting the views of the groups, and I hope that everyone will agree to adopt it as amended by John Nater. Let me deal with the amendment. Yes, you have something to say on the amendment? Yes, on the amendment. You have the floor. I entirely agree with my colleague, Mr. Nater, for his choice of the word consult, for the simple reason. And I also agree with what François Choquette said. This is not something that applies specifically to the present government, but to all subsequent governments. Whether we're talking about the present government or a future government, it does clarify certain matters. When it comes to the appointment to the position of Commissioner of Official Languages, there will be a requirement to consult the groups that are concerned by this, directly concerned by this. And this is why I would ask my Liberal colleagues to accept the amendment being proposed by Mr. Nater. Any further comments on the amendment? Those in favor of the amendment? Recorded vote. Committee clerk, then we'll have a recorded vote.
No. Madame Lapointe? Monsieur Lefebvre?
No.
Monsieur Sanson?
No.
Monsieur Vandal?
No.
Madame Boucher? Oui. Monsieur Généreux?
Oui.
Monsieur Nater?
Oui.
Monsieur Choquette?
Oui.
L'amendement est
The amendment is defeated. Now we'll turn to the main motion. Who wishes to say something on the main motion? Sylvie? What I'd like to ask people is to show a certain amount of indulgence towards the official language communities. In Mr. Choquette's motion, and I'm quite disturbed to see the reaction. When we see that all the controversy created by Madame Bayeux, we find this attitude. We're not talking about protecting political parties or members of parliament. What we see here then is putting obstacles in the way when in our efforts to protect language minorities. I find this very disturbing, and I hope that someone may have a brilliant idea on the other side, because I think we're starting to see enough of this. Any other comments? No other further comments? Bernard, I think that you have something to say. I would repeat the same sort of comment as my colleague. The controversy faced by the government when in appointing Madame Meilleur, I think should have had some effect. People should have learned something from it. I don't think what we're asking for is very complicated. As Mr. Choquette said, he is not the one who is asking to meet the Prime Minister. He's simply being a spokesperson for two associations that represent the two largest associations in the country, representing minority language, minority Anglophones and Francophones, so that they can meet the Prime Minister as part of this process. I don't see what type of threat this can represent to the government. But after what we've seen, it seems to me that this should have gone without saying, opening up the doors to these people as a simple matter of basic respect. And I think it's very unfortunate. Perhaps I could simply mention, I think that debate did take place in the House of Commons. The Minister of Heritage said that she is willing to receive them. We're not talking about the Minister of Heritage. I'm simply pointing out that the matter was raised in the House of Commons. The Minister did answer certain questions on the subject. I didn't say it wasn't in order. We have the motion in front of us. Everyone is free to speak, so we'll have a vote on this motion, then a recorded vote. The committee clerk will conduct the vote.
En passant, Monsieur le Président, ce n'est qu'une motion.
Is this simply a motion, Chairman? The government can decide what to do with this motion, to treat it as it wishes. The fact that we have the committee refusing the motion to create a type of power wall between the government and these language communities, in fact, amounts to making use of your position here in the official language committee, so that these people are unable to have access to the Prime Minister and to discuss the process that will be involved in the appointment of the next commissioner. It seems to me that this is rather insulting towards the committee. Paul Lefebvre? I completely disagree with your observation, Mr. General. The motion that we have before us would mean that they could speak to the Prime Minister. I think that this is far beyond the role of our committee. The role of our committee, we have no jurisdiction of this type. They may request to see the Prime Minister themselves. 49.1, Section 49.1 is very clear, and even the letter makes it clear. That is why I'm against this motion. And if these organizations, the QCGN and FCFA, wish to make a request to the Prime Minister, they may do so themselves. It doesn't have to go through our committee. I don't agree with Mr. Lefebvre, because this is the case, Mr. Lefebvre. What is the purpose of this committee? You are the first persons then, the ones who defend the Francophone committee and the English-speaking community, but we're simply asking for a certain amount of accountability. We had similar motions. It's not for us to establish what the Prime Minister's agenda will be, but what is the role of the official languages community if we cannot do anything to defend these committees that expect us to be able to speak for them? What role are you playing in the Official Languages Committee? We should probably change the name, because you are not defending the official languages communities. You are simply defending your government. And this is unacceptable, because the Acadian, the English-speaking communities in Quebec do require our support. No matter what our political allegiance, we are simply relaying their concerns, because they are unable to make a motion here. But if this committee is unable to deal with a motion such as this, what is the purpose of being here? Simply looking at each other and then coming up with fine reports. Mr. Chairman? I'm not quite sure how I can express what my feelings are here. I'm very disappointed, because we are clashing with each other. We've been clashing with each other for about a month and a half. And I'd like to thank Madame Meilleur for withdrawing her candidacy. She was the only one that had the dignity to take the proper action, the action that was required. But having said that, you talked perhaps to members of these associations, the FCFA, QCGN, and various other associations. What type of message did you hear from them? They asked me to remove all this partisanship from our committee when it comes to the selection of the next commissioner. Can we put an end to this? And what we've seen here once again today is that the partisanship has shown its head. You could have, for example, proposed an amendment to this motion. You could have done something different, and you still have the possibility. But simply dismissing this motion, simply refusing the official languages community, our committee, that has a specific mandate, namely defending the Official Languages Act, and ensure that it is applied and complied with. And to defend the vitality of official language communities, what has the official languages community been asking for the past several weeks? Meeting the Prime Minister, not the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister himself. And in this particular aspect, you did receive some advice. Last week, I said, let's take all the time necessary to look at this. We'll be tabling a motion. We could have decided to vote on it, right? We were in a partisan mode. We'll vote against each other, and there would be all the usual squabbling. We said, let's take the time to take a good look at this, and we'll discuss the matter next Tuesday. It doesn't seem to me, I don't have the impression that you've taken a good look at this. And that is what disturbs me. I don't think that we have any further meetings until before the end of the session. I don't know if we have a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday. This is something that we're going to talk about before the end of our meeting. But in the case of the QCGN, FCFA, and other groups representing official languages communities, I think that we could agree on a motion. It doesn't have to be exactly the motion that has been presented, but I think that we can remove this partisanship, because we'll never be able to get rid of this partisanship if we don't do something. And the groups have told us that they're fed up with this. There's nothing to be obtained through such a debate. And this means that while all this is in the forefront, we are not dealing with early childhood education and other issues. If we do not have a meeting before next week, we might perhaps have a special meeting next Thursday. I don't know what exactly we can do. But I think that we could you could have a chance to call the people, the presidents of these two groups, and find out what exactly they would like to have and what exactly we can do to provide support for this process, the process in the future. Because I think that the way we've started off here, there's nothing to expect but further division.
Yes, Bernard. I'd like to appeal to your independence. The Official Languages Committee is independent. We can amend Mr. Choquette's motion, and if you want to, please go ahead. This is an independent committee. You don't have to follow the whip, Ms. Lapointe. You talk about the Anglophone community. What's going to be in the newspaper tomorrow? Ms. Lapointe voted against these communities, like the QCGN meeting with the Prime Minister. And the Minister was saying in the House, she said we were independent. So, ladies and gentlemen, please do your work. It's as simple as that. René. If we're going to set partisanship aside, let's do it in an objective, generous way, and respectful way on both sides of the table. I admire everyone on this committee. If we want to set partisanship aside, we have to stop interfering in the government's choices. Mr. Choquette, what you're saying, know that you are being heard. You're telling us that our committee is completely handicapped because in a motion here, your motion is not being accepted, a motion that you suggest that people should have access to the Prime Minister. All committees could do that, and they could all have all kinds of people meeting with the Prime Minister. What you're saying publicly is that in your motion, which is a recommendation to ask the Prime Minister to meet with these organizations, you're saying if we don't vote for it, that we are handicapped. We've dealt around this table with immigration, with Air Canada, with all kinds of things, and each time we didn't skirmish. We always adopted our resolutions unanimously. So stop saying that the committee is handicapped because we have not supported your amendment or your motion. If we're going to put partisanship aside, we have to distinguish between section 49.1 and people having access to the Prime Minister. I'm very comfortable voting against this motion. Well, with all due respect to Mr. Arsenault, and he knows how much I respect him, I respect all members on this committee, but this is rich. If people can ask for meetings with the Prime Minister, they're free to do so. Is that what you're saying? So then we're free to do it as well. We could ask for a meeting with the Prime Minister. Nothing prevents us from voting for this motion because we're free members. So don't try to give me some lawyer's argument that because communities have come to see us, their representatives have come to see us. We're not asking for this, Mr. Arsenault. It's the communities that are asking this. And in your lawyer's argument, look, I'm not buying it. It's the QCGN and the SCAF. This is a motion to support the asks of these groups. We know that the PMO will manage his agenda, but it's just taking one more step. It's saying, look, Prime Minister, even why don't these communities want to meet with you because they want your help? Let's respect one another and not play it at lawyers' arguments. My name is Sylvie Boucher, and that's what I work in my writing, and I represent people, and I worked on the Official Languages Committee. We've all had political wins, and we didn't win because of things like that. So we're fighting because of something, and you're rejecting something that doesn't hurt anyone. It just gives these communities extra support to obtain access to the Prime Minister. And we know that Gerald Butts and Katie Telford will manage all this. For 3 weeks or a month now, with the nomination of Madame Meilleur, they don't want that to happen again. They don't want this to go to the Senate and lead to the same sort of circus we saw there. It's not just for the government today, but it's for all future governments. So it's the communities want to be consulted, no matter who's in power. It's up to the Prime Minister to say. But we will have done our job as a committee by helping them to get to this discussion with the PM, and the PM will make his own decision. And now, François Choquette. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understand Section 49.1, it's the Official Languages Act. But the facts is that this isn't a normal situation to have had 5 weeks of controversy, so much controversy that the person who was nominated withdrew her candidacy. The controversy was that huge, and it divided people. It kept them busy with the controversy. It was like we were trapped by it. Now, what we're saying to the Prime Minister is that he's going to have to choose a new commissioner. And what these communities want to say to the Prime Minister is, before you decide, look at what we would like you to do. And yes, Minister Joly met with her. But when one of the women from these communities left the meeting with Mélanie Joly, she said, I'd still like to meet the Prime Minister. And what did Mr. Shea of the Quebec Communities Network group said the same thing. Now, we're not in a situation that you would normally have. We're at the end of a 5 weeks of controversy, And now we have official languages communities who are saying, we want to deal with this. And if we want to deal with this, we as a committee, and a committee that has torn itself apart, that has been tearing itself apart for a month and a half, is it possible that we can sit down and say, look, we're setting this aside, but we are not going to allow a process that was nonsensical. We're not going to allow official language communities suffer. We should sit down as a committee and send a clear message. What do these communities want? They want to meet with the Prime Minister in order to present their recommendations to him. They're not saying who the next commissioner should be. They're just saying this is what we'd like you to bear in mind for the process so we won't feel excluded. And official languages is something that should be taken with the greatest seriousness, because the situation is a really exceptional one, and it is a serious one. And I reiterate my appeal. If you need time to think, if you want to call one another in order to deal that, well, so be it. But let's do it for official language communities who are saying it's time that we deal with this because it's hurting all official language communities. It's not just Section 49.1 that's at issue. Thank you, Francois. Are there any other comments? Bernard? Quickly, Mr. Chairman. All they have to do on the government side is abstain. That can be their way out of this controversy or this difficulty. There was a question asked earlier, which was sort of like this: what are we doing next Tuesday? Because we're sitting tomorrow from 12 to 1. Please allow me to finish, Ms. Boucher. At the present time, I'm speaking. I just wanted to mention that Wednesday we will have the two ministers here, and we had decided not to sit as a committee on Thursday. And from what I can see, we will be here next week. So next Tuesday, I propose that we put committee work on our agenda. And it's, as Francois said, we can bring the motion back then, next Tuesday when this committee meets again. And now, I don't know if this is to your liking. There's also a second motion. And Sylvie, well, I don't know how things are going to go. Some people say we're going to be rising earlier, and some are saying next week. But I believe that the motion is an important one, and Bernard has given a way out, or an elegant way of doing things to the people across the way. And this would perhaps allow us to help official language communities if we have a meeting next Tuesday. I won't be here because I'll be in my riding for personal reasons, but beyond that, I will be in contact with my colleagues. You can always get me through my phone. But I find it really lamentable that we're still at this stage. It seems that we've always worked so well together. And then there was Ms. Mayer's nomination that led to quite a fuss. I say, and I repeat to the media, that my trust has been broken. And this has nothing to do with my colleagues here, but I have seen one thing as I get older, Politics is one thing, but petty politics is another. Can't stand it. Well, given that we're all permanent members, I would prefer that we vote today. Yes, but tomorrow we have an hour with the ministers rather. I think we could take perhaps another hour, but think about this on your side. Look at the solutions we're offering to you. We could discuss it tomorrow because we don't know how this is going to end. And our official language minorities need us, by gosh. We need a spokesman right now. Any other comments? Yes, Bernard. Well, despite Ms. Boucher's absence next week, we could sit next Tuesday or next Thursday. We're here at a week. We aren't sitting Thursday because we're sitting Tuesday, Wednesday, but for the following week, no problem. Well, time is marching on, and I say that perhaps we can do it next Tuesday and part of a committee which can be called committee work. So it's 5-1. We have a second motion, which we can deal with next Tuesday. And the clerk will then have an idea of the dates for traveling to Halifax and Brome-Missisquoi. When we're going, when we're coming back. Well, we'll be sitting to the end. But when will we be coming back? It's quite difficult to plan these things without knowing. Well, the return can be may change, the return of Parliament. But we can look at these two approaches with the Anglophone community in Quebec and with the Francophone communities outside Quebec. I think we might leave a small number, perhaps someone from the Conservative side, Francois, and a Liberal or two, to discuss dates. So Francois, Linda, John, and John. So we'll be seeing each other outside the committee, and we can think about dates for these two trips. Just for your information, the two ministers tomorrow will have about 7.5 minutes for their presentations. So that'll take about 15 minutes. Then we'll have a period of questions and answers. And we might take a few seconds at the end of the meeting. So thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.